All right, folks, welcome back. We are going to get started with the second installment of Pirkei Avot, year, what is this, year 5? Year 6. For those of you watching at home or in your office, shalom. Hello. Nice to have you with us. Before we get back into our text, and after 6 years, or 5 years, we have finally reached chapter 3. I want to give just a little bit of, for those of you who are studying this for the first time, a little teeny bit of the historical background of what Pirkei Avot represents. Last time we talked about the fact that it is a section of Mishnah, a section of Jewish law, from the Talmud, and it is a section of Mishnah that does not have Gemara. We talked about it doesn't have the commentary of the later rabbis on it. But this particular section of the Mishnah comes to us from a highly, highly transitional time in Jewish history. And that was the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 of the common year. And, we just say that like, the temple was destroyed in 70, like it was raining this morning. But you have to realize, that this was the whole center of Jewish life. It was as if the vast majority of Jewish people lived in Israel, which is not even true to this day. There's about 6 million Jews in Israel, and there's about 6 million Jews in the rest of the world. But imagine if 80% of the Jewish people in the world lived in Israel, and their expression of Judaism was to go to Jerusalem periodically, and then somebody nuked Jerusalem. What would Judaism look like? How would you respond to such cataclysm? God forbid, we hate to think about what would happen if that were to happen to modern Israel. But at least we know that there's Jews throughout the world. At that time, Jews were mostly centered right there in Israel. And so how did the Jewish people withstand losing the basis of what Jewish worship, belief, and practice was all about? If you read through the Torah, there's no mention of rabbis in the Torah. There's no mention of synagogues in the Torah. There's no mention of davening in the Torah. There's no mention of weekly reading of the Torah in the Torah itself. None of that stuff is there. It was all an invention of what happened post-70. The way the rabbis, our tradition, our leaders figured out how to deal with this horrible thing. Because when you look in the Torah, how did people daven in the time of the Torah?
Sacrifices.
Yeah, they offered animal sacrifices. Where could they do that? Only in Jerusalem in biblical times. In the Torah times, only in the wandering sanctuary called the Mishkan, but only in Jerusalem. That was their connection to God. They brought these sacrifices, and that connected them with God. And then all of a sudden, the whole means for communication with God was fallen. The whole thing was gone. Yeah,
was that the transition then from the idolatry stages where they did worship animals to where we are now?
Well, yeah.
And if it's true, why do they say that when the Mashiach comes, there's going to be sacrifices again? That's my problem. Yafa too. Yes.
That's your whole problem, is that when the Mashiach comes, you're going to have to offer animal sacrifices. And you really plan ahead, Robinson. I gotta hand it to you. No, but what Robinson is referencing is an opinion made, a school of thought made most prominent by the Rambam, who lived about 1,000 years ago. Maimonides said that everybody in the ancient world offered animal sacrifices, and so did we. And then at a certain point, when God realized that we got spiritually more mature, God took away the pacifier, as it were, the animal sacrifice, and we went to prayer. And then Robin Sue is saying that perhaps in the time of the Messiah, when the temple is dry, everybody will offer animal sacrifices. I don't worry about that when it comes.
There's a whole section.
And does that mean
there
they
is.
have to come to church?
There's a whole group of people who say
the
that.
menorah is already there on the, in front of the Harabah.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between praying that the worship would be restored at the temple, and the fact that every single synagogue in the world would cease to exist in animal sacrifice, and only means of conduit to God would be in Jerusalem, and so everybody living in the diaspora around the world would be cut off from a meaningful expression of connection with God. I don't think that's the origin.
So you see what the problem
That's
is.
the intent.
But we pray
In the
for
meantime, the solution, regardless of how we got to it, the solution was that the rabbis took the holy chutzpah to be able to say, we know how to connect with God now in a way that we don't need the temple. They realized that we weren't going to be able to rebuild that temple. They knew that the Roman occupation was not something to be trifled with. And quite frankly, they weren't really hungry for the Sadducees to get back into power. Those Sadducees made their life miserable because they saw Judaism being practiced all around outside of the temple, and that was a tremendous threat to their authority. And so what the rabbis had to do essentially was say that there was a direct stream of normative Jewish life that went from Moses at Mount Sinai all the way through the biblical period to the post-biblical period, directly to them, to the rabbis. And they conveniently circumvent the Sadducees and the people in the temple. And you know what? We're super lucky that they did. Because the Judaism that we have can go anywhere, and can be accessed wherever people are, and wherever people build community and create synagogues and use prayer and all of that. And the reason I point this out is that one of the interesting things about this particular period of time, when a lot of this Mishnah, this Pirkei Avot, was written, is that transitional time. We have the writings of people who lived right through that time. We looked at in previous years. We looked at Shimon Bar Yochai, who rebuilt Judaism after the destruction. But we are going to look. The first rabbi that we're looking at in this, in his teaching, in today's teaching, is one of the rabbis who lived during the time when the temple was still standing. And one of the reasons that we know is that he was very controversial. The rabbi that we're reading about, you'll find it on page 36 in your text, is called Akavia ben Mahalalel. And by the way, if you're watching this online, if you email me, I will send you a copy of the text as well. And if you intend to continue to study online, I can even send you the texts ahead of time so that you have them in front of you while we're learning. So this Akavia ben Mahalalel is a really kind of interesting guy. If you look in the notes, the Kravitz notes there on the page, it says, who first lived in the 1st century CE. It was a contemporary of Hillel, a member of the Sanhedrin, which was the great rabbinic court of the time. Known for his agreement with the disagreement with the majority, he was labeled the rebellious scholar and was eventually excommunicated because of an unusual legal decision. And so I just read that and had to know what the unusual legal decision was. And do you want to comment on the unusual?
It's interesting. His name is Akavia. Ekev is like me'akev, to go against.
Interesting, Yafa. Interesting. Me'akev, to go against. I think his name is Akavia, just like it's Akiba, which is an Aramaic contemporary version of Yaakov. But interesting. Yeah.
Yaakov held on to.
Very interesting derivation. Could be. The thing that he ruled about is something it's kind of esoteric, and then at the same time it's kind of relevant today. It was a whole ruling about the sota. You know what sota from the Torah?
Yeah.
So what was the sota?
So if the woman was adulterous,
Yeah,
she had to drink
right.
the,
Suspected.
She had to
drink the.
Yeah.
If a woman is suspected of adultery by her husband, they take a piece of text, they write on it, they grind, they make it into ash, they put it in water, and they make her drink it.
And if her stomach
I know.
swells up, then
Iris's nose is crinkling up because who
they
would
don't
want?
do anything to the guy.
Right. So the good news.
No, but they never did it, ever, they said.
Right. So the bad news is it's in the Torah and it doesn't look great for the way that we treat women. The good news is that tradition tells us, as we hear from the other end of the table, it was rarely, if ever, invoked. But also, the thing about it is that although it's a fairly unsavory process, the idea of drinking ashes mixed with water, compared to some of the things people juice today, it's not such a terrible thing. And so if she was fine, if she could drink the ash water, she was off the hook. It was only
She didn't commit the adultery.
right,
That's
right,
what I
right,
said.
exactly. And he had to take her back.
It's kind of like drown the witch,
Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by.
you know.
But
in
nothing
Salem.
was ever
In-
done to the men that supposedly
No.
she was involved with.
Absolutely. So Akavia tried to limit the number of women to whom this law would apply. So he said it was only native-born Jewish women, not anybody who converted, and not anyone who was taken into Jewish community by virtue of becoming a bondswoman or a slave, which was a large group of people. And the majority said, no, it's got to be all women that this applies to. And Akavia said, no, it's only this much smaller group because it's a Torah-based commandment that only would apply to the people for whom the Torah was initially given and not those who joined later. And he got excommunicated for this. Later on in his life, the Talmud does tell us, and there aren't a lot of Akavia references, the rabbis were so uncomfortable with that idea that they read two things. Number one, it really didn't happen. He really wasn't excommunicated. And number two, even if he was, they let him come back into the temple anyhow.
Right.
You know.
Revisionist history.
Yeah, a little bit of revisionist history. Anyhow, but the thing about Akavia that does put it in its right context here is this is definitely a guy who spoke his mind and wasn't afraid to say what he was thinking. And it's kind of odd that they begin this chapter of Pirkei Avot with these cheerful thoughts. So let's look at the Mishnah number 3. Akavia ben Mechalalel used to say, reflect on 3 things and you will not come into the grasp of sin. Know where you came from, know where you're going, and know in whose presence you will have to make an accounting for. In other words, realize your past, live in your present, anticipate your future. Okay, that seems like nice things to think about. Where did you come from, your past? From a disgusting drop. Nice.
What is the drop?
Yes.
Guess. Birth? That is?
Don't know much about it.
Okay, just checking. That is what it means. Okay.
Yes,
Well,
it
of
means,
course
it,
they
mean,
were
it means
new to
semen.
it.
It means semen.
I think
Oh,
they knew the fact.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it meant birth.
Oh, that's,
Yeah, I was the first.
I thought it meant
No,
birth.
I think it means semen.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, that's
All
what
right.
I think.
Oh, I
I was
thought they were
thinking
saying
drop.
that birth.
A drop is it physically
Yeah.
fall
Yes.
fall down?
Like the
Oh,
pattern.
no.
You're thinking too clean.
No, the word, no, that's an English anomaly that doesn't exist in Hebrew. In Hebrew, a tipah is a drop. So if you say, like if you're in a restaurant and you say, ktsat tipah chalav, that means put a little drop of coffee in my, cream in my coffee. you know. But so no, so this is
Oh.
literally a drop.
like-
That's
okay.
interesting. I never, you know, I've read this Mishnah 100 times. It never occurred to me about it, like the drop of a bit. Interesting. So that kind of a drop to where you are going, and we would like to think, you know, of course, the lovely world to come. But no, he goes to a place of dust, of worms, and of maggots. Also nice.
But that gets you to the world to come.
What's that?
Because your soul has to separate from your body, and you go into the dust and the worms and the maggots, and then you could think, I'm giving you the opportunity.
We'll get there. We'll get there,
No, I
Robin.
agree
So,
with you. Yeah.
absolutely. But and in whose presence you will make an accounting, the most sovereign of sovereigns, the Holy One of blessing. And the last class. For those of you who were not in the last class, I was reflecting on the first word, which means reflect, because what akabia means here is take that step back and consider, meditate on this. And one of the things that we were talking about last time is how little we do that in today's society, that if you have a spare moment, chances are you take out, if you're like me, you take out your cell phone and go through, God forbid, you should go 6 minutes without checking your email or your voicemail or your phone messages. When you get into the car, the first thing that you do is turn on the radio, because God forbid you should have 5 minutes to be alone with your thoughts, let alone a half hour from when going from one place to the other. And the proof of this, by the way, to my mind, is talk radio.
Yeah.
It's sort of the antithesis of reflection, in a certain sense. Because it's one thing to listen to music and your mind can wander. But it seems to me if you're listening to talk radio and your mind wanders, then you miss the whole point of talk radio. The whole point of talk radio is to not reflect. It's to be able to listen to what's going on and follow their train of thought. And the rabbis of the Musar periods, or the 1800s, 1800s, particularly Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, introduced a concept that we talked about last time in this session, which hopefully wasn't drowned out by a commercial, was called hitbodedut, which literally means self-seclusion. That a person should, on a regular basis, find time, and what Rabbi Nachman said would be go into the woods. So even if you don't physically go into the woods, to metaphorically go in the woods and talk to God and share what's in your heart. Because in the process of talking to God, you articulate your emotions in a way that makes your thoughts real. And that's the kind of reflection that Akavya is talking about. Hitbodedut is really to think about who you are and what your motives are in life. I mean, what moves you forward? What are you looking for? What are you trying for? What are you hoping to accomplish? Who are you as an individual? And so he says, reflect on those three things, which we'll get to individual. And I just want to comment briefly, though, on the next phrase, because I just find it so illustrative. You reflect on these things, and you won't come into the grasp. The word here is yad, which literally means hands, the grasp of sin. And I know, I love that metaphor. It's like, it's literally what's holding you back. You know, what's got a hold of you? What's grabbing you? What's constraining you? What's keeping you from moving forward? That's, you know, it doesn't say, think about these three things and you won't behave poorly. It's think about these things and understand what is really grabbing you and keeping you from acting. You know, when I think of grabbing you, I feel like restraining you, you know, and keeping you from being the person you want to be by keeping you from doing the things you want to do. And I just find that a very powerful. Anybody, any thoughts anyone wants to share on that?
Well, I think of it as the grasp of sin, that sin is always out there trying to pull you in.
Right.
And by doing this, you're going to be protecting yourself from that.
Right. Sin, as it says actually, remember in the sin, you might remember in the beginning of Genesis, in Cain and Abel, sin is crouching at your door. It's like it's right outside, you know, like a little demon ready to just grab you. Yeah.
I think of it as the, like the Yetzer Hara, but the way I understand.
The Yetzer Hara being the evil impulse, yeah.
inclination. The way I understand the good and the evil inclinations are like those old-time cartoons where they had the two little men outside your head, and one was the happy angelic type, I was like the devilish type.
Right.
So like, you know, you listen to them, you can listen
Right.
to them, and you're always fighting back and forth.
Right, and one side of you and the other of your the inner workings of your heart and soul. Anyone else want to comment on the grasp of sin? Okay, so let's take a look at and if we think about these things, there's not going to get us into the grasp of sin. But before we even get into sort of the specifics, what strikes I don't know, I'll tell you what something strikes me really odd about, think about these things, that you came from semen, that you're going to end up in the ground, and that you're going to have to give accounting to God, and that'll keep you from the grasp of sin? Couldn't one argue exactly the opposite?
Why bother?
Right, exactly.
Why
Couldn't one simply say exactly if you came from the random act of procreation and you're going where everybody else goes and the whole way of all flesh, and eventually you'll get before God like everybody else does. So why not just eat, drink, and be merry?
Because I think what I think is the point is the third thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. That's why when you say, why can't you look at it the other way around? Sorry. That's why you can't look at it the other way around. That's why you can't look at it. Because it's not, here today, gone tomorrow.
Right.
There is something.
It's here today, going somewhere tomorrow.
Yeah. And because and in the end, you're going to have to make an accounting.
Mm-hmm.
If you take away number 3, then you're right. Eat, drink, and be merry. I mean, why not?
That's a great point, Beth.
And that's why I think you can't look at it the other way around.
That's a great point.
It's also saying, who are you? You're nothing. You're nobody. You're going to end up like everybody else.
Right.
Is this what you want to be your legacy when you come before the Almighty?
Okay, that's a good way of looking at it
Right.
too. Right, you start from nothing, but do you want to end up nothing as well, or do you want to make something of your life so that when you get to point number 3, as Patty was saying, you have what to argue in your behalf?
It also helps you to focus on your spiritual side, not just your physical side, because the first 2 are totally physical.
Mm-hmm.
But the third one says to you that even when you're gone and you're in the ground and the worms and the maggots get you, then you're going to make an accounting to God. So who was that person?
Right.
That's your soul, and therefore nourish your soul and don't let it go into the grass of sin.
And also, I think that if you want to take a less theological view, a more I guess secular, less theological view, in the end, the same thing happens to all of us. And what's going to be left in people's memories of us
Is going to be the
there's
spiritual.
there's our temporal legacy,
It's gonna, right.
as well as our spiritual.
Right, the thing that's
legacy.
going to endure will be what comes out of point number 3.
And I mean, do you really want people thinking of you as that great playboy, or do you want people thinking of you as something different?
Who's leaving a more polished, lasting legacy. What's the force, though, of this being reminded that you come from tipaskora, from the fetid drop, as it says in some translations? What value is it trying to teach us?
That we're all born the same way. It's what we do with our lives.
Okay, then we're all born the same way, and it's what we do with our lives. Is there a single word for what you think this imagery is trying to push us towards?
Humility.
Humility. Yeah, I think humility, right? Humility is sort of at the basis of this. And by the way, this is in contrast. Remember, this was written somewhere around the beginning of the 1st century, and there were a lot of people in the world who still bought into the mythology that certain people were born of gods. You know, that they, as opposed to being flesh and blood all the way through. And so that's part of this lesson in humility. And I think one of the things that Akavi is kind of pushing us towards is that realize that one of the most vain of pursuits is the pursuit of honor, and that it is something, respect of others, and that the desire to have that kind of pride, which is self-centered, actually takes us out of the meaningful relationships in life. There's actually a Mishnah, if you want to look on page 68, that puts this rather succinctly. It's chapter 421 in this version of Pirkei Avot, and it says, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar said, envy, lust, and the pursuit of glory take a person out of this world. What's the Hebrew word for glory? It says it right there. Kavod. Right, the pursuit of honor. Right, exactly. Who is the one who's going to be honored? The person who lives an exemplary life but doesn't make other people know that they need to be honored. And I want to draw to your attention a wonderful section of the Shulchan Aruch, which is 16th century code of Jewish law, that Yafa was teaching this morning. Yafa was observing Yortzeit for her father, Rabbi Weintraub of blessed memory, and was teaching about the 5th commandment, which comes from this week's Torah portion, about honoring one's parents. Listen to this law. This is from the Shulchan Aruch. So it's the sort of quintessential code of Jewish law. The Talmud and all the earlier codes all contributed to this, but everything that's come afterwards is based on this particular code called the Shulchan Aruch. And listen to what it says about parents. And of course it has all the things that you should honor and respect and revere your parents and all that kind of stuff, and treat them well and take care of them, etc. But it says, it is forbidden for a person to burden his children by being particular about them honoring him. It is forbidden for a person to burden his children by being particular about the way that they honor him. This is so that he will not pose a stumbling block before them. Rather, he should forgo his own honor and close his eyes to their actions. Wow. That's an incredible
so
source.
What does that mean? If you get a birthday gift you don't like from your children, don't say anything.
Right.
It means that, well, what is it? What do you think? What does it mean to you? I mean, what does this text mean to you?
It means to me that you don't, how do I put this? You don't be selfish.
Right.
In demanding that they honor you, or they come to see you, or that they give you gifts. That you let it come from them willingly, not as a command.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That what you're saying, it totally resonates with me, Gloria.
That even the fact that it's commanded to honor your mother and father, so you would assume that, everybody knows you have to honor your mother and father. Why shouldn't a parent do that? But I think the Shulchan Aruch wants to point out how much humility is valued, even more so than the commandment to honor a parent, because you cannot tell them to honor you. You have to be humble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rabbi Furman says it best. I've heard him say it many times. He said, with his daughters, once I have to tell you to take out the garbage, you already missed. They have to think of it on their own.
Okay. What I
So you can't say, why didn't you call? say.
Right. You should,
You
right.
didn't call, you didn't write.
But in the larger sense, what I think that this text that Jaffa, thank you, brought, and I think that what this whole idea of humility is, it means not being self-serving in relationship. That the goal of a meaningful relationship is not what can you do for me. That a parent isn't good to a child because they want to be getting honor, a certain set of criterion of honor in return. They're good because being a good parent is what you should do. And that if you follow through on that naturally, the honor will hopefully be reciprocated. But if you have a whole set of criterion in any relationship where if the person doesn't meet X, Y, and Z, then they are nothing to you, or the relationship can't be what you want. If every relationship in your life has to always be 50-50, where the other person meets you halfway, you're not going to be able to have those kinds of relationships. A healthy life of relationship. The nature of humility is that sometimes it's going to be 90-10 and you're going to be giving the 90 and getting the 10. And that's not a bad thing, because sometimes if that relationship therefore works and the person is worth being in relationship with, then it's going to flip around. And it's going to bounce. Right. And the law of averages over time, it will ultimately even out. And I think that's why this idea of humility is so very important. And that's Agavia goes to great lengths to point that out. To where are you going? To a place of dust, of worms, and of maggots. And I think, Robin Sue, you really hit the nail on the head here, which is to say the reason why he's using this image is to say it looks like that's where you're going. But the rabbis of this time totally and unequivocally, and comes through in many of these texts, believed as we do today in life after death. That this world is not the only world that there is, and that the only world that it's hubris to think that only the things that we can see, taste, and touch are all that exists in the world, and that ultimately we will need to be able to give that accounting. But more importantly, as you said, and I don't remember, Gloria, if it was you or Patty, it is the spiritual that ultimately endures. I want to take a look finally at the last piece of this Mishnah, in whose presence you will have to make an accounting. And for those who are familiar with the Hebrew,
We had this before.
right, it says din v'cheshbon. So din and cheshbon are taken together as an accounting. But the fact that it has the word ve in it, what is ve in Hebrew?
And
Right, it means it's something and something else, meaning it's two distinct things. So din usually means judgment, right? Judge, right? A judgment, right? We say on the high holidays that we want God to move off of his seat of din and onto his of judgment, of strict judgment, and go onto his seat of rachamim. So he's a lot more comfortable over there when he's looking at your ledger, right? And cheshbon. What is a cheshbon?
It's like a bill, an accounting. A bill.
Right, and here in modern Hebrew, right, Patty, it's a bill. Right, if you're in a restaurant in Israel and you want to get out, you say cheshbon, and you put up your hand, and they bring you the your what do you call it? Your check. Check. That's the word. Your check. And so in rabbinic parlance, in the imagery of the rabbis, din is what you should do. And cheshbon is what you did. And very simple, but very powerful. On one hand, there's the things that you should have done, and on the other hand, there are things that you did. And in between are the things that you wish you did. And so that part of what din and cheshbon is that at some time, you're going to have to give accounting for opportunities missed, for time squandered, for the lack of living fully the way you would have wanted to had you thought about what Akavi is saying now beforehand. It's a very powerful sense of self-awareness that you don't want to live a life full of unfulfilled potential. And what is to understand your potential gets back to what we started out talking about, which is, we all come from nothing. We all come from the same common. But what you achieve is in direct proportion to what you hope to achieve, to your aspirations, the goals that you set for yourself. And so on one hand, when you look at what Akavia says, it seems very cynical. Everybody's going to end up at Crescent or Locust Wood anyhow, so you might as well do whatever you want today. But if you add the third part of this Din V'Cheshbon, then it's much more nuanced. It's like there's a lot that happens before that. And ultimately, there's going to be that accountability. And if you know that there's accountability, whether it's some mystical place in the world to come, or just your own understanding that your life is finite, you want to be the kind of person who takes account of their own lives and lives thoughtfully, and make sure that you don't leave a lot of unfulfilled potential on the table when the game is over.
What's your thought about, or I guess is it possible it could be talking also about the fact that you don't want to look back with a lot of regret?
Yeah, no regrets.
Which I guess is kind of, again, the less theological, the more temporal. But as part of it, when you look back on your life, because I don't think anybody has no regrets.
Right, of course.
I mean, at least nobody I know.
Right.
And I think we all can think of things we wish we had thought more about or done more thoughtfully, or could we do it again? We would do it again. So, we're all going to be in the middle there somehow. But the idea being that if you try, maybe there'll be fewer of them.
I think you're 100%. Great Torah teaching, Patty. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think this is very similar to Rabbi Elazar, who says, know in whose presence you work,
right,
and how dependable your employer is to pay her wage. Same kind of idea.
Absolutely. I think that the whole idea, and I think this is so important, the whole idea of accountability is to make you stop and consider your life. Because we get so involved in the daily tsuris. And at every age, everybody, my father used to say, you're eganatsuris. Everybody has their own eganatsuris. So I work with a group of young parents who are developing as future leaders of Bethel. We meet once a month for 2.5 hours over dinner. And we talk about leadership skills and the role of synagogue in Jewish life in their lives, and have them reflect on that and think about them. They're all 35 to 45 years old. We're taking a national course from United Synagogue. And this week we were talking about how you use your time. And we filled out a chart of how many hours do you spend doing this, how many hours do you spend doing this, how many hours do you, and how would you rather reallot your time? And one of the things that came through with their schedules was raising kids and working and running a home and doing all of these things. They have no time for anything spiritual, any time for that self-reflection, any time to really sharpen the saw so that when they cut, it cuts better, the next time. And the kind of cool thing about it was that at the end of 2 hours and 20 minutes of discussion, I pointed out to them, first of all, there's no such thing as making time. You can't make time. Time is finite. You can only take time, right? But miraculously, they took 2 hours and did it. And as busy as they were, that if you realize that you have the potential for personal growth by cutting out this time to reflect, to regroup, to dream, to aspire, to hope, to all of those kinds of things, that's the spiritual pursuit. And Akavia is saying that sometimes it takes realizing that life is finite. You can't make time. But you can take time to do those things that will make life more meaningful. And I think that ultimately that's the message of this first Mishnah. So I'm glad you had time to come and study and reflect with me here today. And if anybody watches this online, hope you enjoyed it. And God willing, see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Did I hear next week?